Hey guys, Anthony, 4x4 Diesel. Really important video. I'm going to explain to you here while I'm driving the reasons why you should use only a moderate lift in a IFS vehicle or any really independent suspension vehicle. In particular, we're talking about the Hilux, the Prados, Hiluxes, Prados, anything with IFS, that's independent front suspension. There's a whole heap of information there that we've obviously had for years and years that we haven't really talked about, because for years and years we've been Prado specialists and really working on Hiluxes for about 10 years, and this is probably one of the reasons why, because we avoid problems. But now we've got the Hilux. I'm driving the Hilux now. Recently we broke a drive shaft, no surprise there. I'm going to quickly explain to you why it happens and then help you out with some spring selections so that you can get the right setup for your IFS vehicle and keep it reliable, so you don't break a CV, so that you don't need diff drops, so that hopefully you can understand when you need a diff drop or other setups. So let's go straight to the Prado just for a moment. Now, on the Prados, for approximately the last 10 years we've been driving Prados, number of different Prados, lots of different Prados on the tracks, including an average of up to about 10 vehicles in the convoy that are mainly Prados on a lot of rough tracks at times. Some inexperienced drivers, some experienced drivers, some with lockers, mostly without, and quite a few of those people from time to time giving it a lot of curry where you think you're going to break something, and nobody's ever broken a CV joint in a Prado. We've had one guy in a 90 series Prado break a diff. He had front and rear lockers, he was cruising uphill gently and took teeth off the crown wheel. Other than that, the Prados have been super reliable. So let's now jump over to the Hiluxes, because it's a completely different story, right? So 10 years ago we were doing suspension for Dobinson suspension for a lot of Prados and Hiluxes before we narrowed it down to being a Prado specialist, obviously, to reduce the work, because we just need to have the best, most reliable vehicles, and we'll help you with the maintenance and prevention on those. That's what we do. In case you didn't know, now's probably a good time to subscribe and turn the bell on. It's not about me and me getting famous, it's about me helping you with all the right, most accurate information, and we'll get better and better at the videos and explaining ourselves while getting to the point. So on the Hilux, from factory they come out with a longer full extension front strut or coilover, whatever you want to call it. We use the word strut, it's short and sweet. It's not a strut actually, it's a coilover, but it doesn't matter, right? You know what I'm talking about. The front suspension, the shock absorber, the open length is longer than a Prado. Okay, so that's part of the problem to start off with. Now, in its standard form, it's highly unlikely you're going to break a CV, okay? The height of the vehicle is completely different to the full extension length, and how far that open length allows the wheel to travel down and therefore change the angle of the CV. Two totally different things, okay? So for example, if you were to have the stock standard front strut and put a raised coil spring onto it, and yes, you can do that, that would be a very cheap and reliable way to get a lift if you don't, travel extensively in the outback and you're not worried about bending or braking, as long as you don't go too high. And this is where I said we're going to talk about a moderate lift. To be quite honest, on the front of a Hilux or Prado, quite often what you want is you want to regain the height you've lost from having that heavy bull bar and whatever gear you've put on the front, and gain a little bit. I'm talking probably 1 inch lift, 30 mil, 30 to 40 mil. I'm kind of like I like 40 mil, even a bit less is better than a bit more. You don't need, what do you think really the extra 10 or 20 mil is really going to get you anywhere further? It's not, especially when you understand, in most cases it's not going to get you anywhere except unreliability. So if you want a cheap lift, if you just want to put some slight springs in the front to bring the front up because you put a bull bar, yes, you can do that, and you're going to keep it reliable doing it that way. It's more the people that really give it a hard time that are going to risk bending the bottom of those struts, breaking those little welds, that need to upgrade to some aftermarket gear now. Okay, so the moderate lift, so the height doesn't only change the angle of the CV, like now when we're driving, slightly, because it's only slightly raised. It doesn't make any difference wear and tear wise or anything like that. Once you put the aftermarket struts in, and usually the aftermarket ones are longer again, because way too many people are chasing too much lift, okay? So they want to be too high, and therefore the higher you go, so that you've still got down travel and the shock absorber strut, whatever, is not topping out, they give it more extension, longer extension going downward, and this is where your problem is. Now, it's fine like this while the wheels are on the ground, but once you're on a hill with the nose pointing uphill, okay, the angles on your CV are far too great for the Hilux setup to handle, because you've already had a longer from factory and then it's gone longer again. So a couple of ways to avoid it is put the Prado part number in the front of the Hilux so that it doesn't travel down too far. You can put cheap diff drops in, or you can get proper diff drop replacement brackets, which we're in the process at the moment. This video could come out sooner or later, doesn't really matter, but I just really wanted to explain it for you so you can avoid those issues. Now, just for you know what, I might just put this one out a bit early, and I'll quickly mention some other information, and that is that you've only got until about the end of August, a few days early September, and we're on our school holiday break again in September, so keep that in mind. And you know, injector kit days are Monday, Dobinson suspension day is Tuesday in the mornings for all this stuff, and the BFE kit and the front wheel bearings is Wednesday, okay, both on the Wednesday there, from first thing in the morning up until about 10 AM for the communication, because then we're busy packing and organising those kits for everybody that listened, that got in early. We're getting it organised, okay. Sometimes there can be some delays and day changes, so keep it on our Facebook pages. Okay, so this video might come out over the next week or something like that, okay. So the Hilux, it's all fixed up with a new drive shaft. It's commonly the driver's side. Now, I noticed something back in 2011 when we broke a drive shaft on our Hilux, okay. I noticed something, and that is that the driver's side of the diff sits higher than the passenger side, and as soon as you loosen it off, it drops down. And when you, without getting too technical with the measurements, when you loosen off the mounting bolts, it drops down at the driver's side and it levels out and it sits a really good angle. And to be quite honest, it's not just our vehicle, so it's happened again on our vehicle. It happened 10 years ago, and when it happened 10 years ago, back in 2011 thereabouts, it's about 10 years, I did a lot of research on it. I followed up, you know, on all the Hilux forums, I basically said, anyone that breaks a CV, let me know. And I found that everybody was, I'm not saying this is the only thing that's going to happen, but everybody that I followed up with, it seemed to be always driver's side, driver's side, driver's side, driver's side. Why do you reckon the majority was driver's side? Do you think it was just a coincidence? Right? I don't think so. It's happened to me on the driver's side again. With that front diff, when it's mounted on a slight angle one side up, you can easily imagine in your common sense, in your mind from listening to me and watching those videos, that the higher that angle up on one side, the more the angle on the CV. And what happens is, it's a tripod on the inner side of it, so the outer side isn't going to break. It's balls and joints, it's just not going to, it doesn't move in and out. It's very strong. It's very, I'm not saying you can't break it. If you've got lockers and you're going doing crazy tracks and you've got 35s and whatever, hey, you can break anything. I'm talking about with normal setups. Even if you drive like a maniac like me sometimes, which I'm going to try not to do that, but I do this from time to time, you can break it, okay? So, because what happens is, the inner joint is the tripod that slides in and out, and at neutral static height. You can't have different length shafts. People can talk about it all they like, 5mm, 10mm, 20mm. At the end of the day, the drive shaft needs to fit between that wheel bearing. That wheel, it doesn't move in and out, inward out, but you know, the diff doesn't move. Toyota's already got the length drive shaft there, that when it's dead set level, that's the length that fits in there, and the tripod's pushed almost all the way in on the cup. If you were to put a new longer shaft, 20mm longer, it's going to be pushing. If they're telling you it's 20mm longer, it's not, because it would be pushing against the bearing, the diff, the bearing on the wheel. You'd have other sorts of problems. Okay, so what happens as that suspension drops down and extends, that inner tripod slides outwards on the cup, and that's the whole point. It can only go to a certain point before it's got too much angle, and then it just basically pops out, like using a uni joint on your tools, on your, you know, 1/2-inch drive, 3/8 drive uni joint, whatever the case may be, not the ball type, the other old type. Imagine that joint was really weak. Once it gets to a certain angle, you know, where it locks up and it just binds and wants to pop out. Well, what happens with a CV joint? That's actually what happens, right? That is what happens. It actually pops out. There's nothing holding it in other than that rubber boot, so there's no strength to it other than keeping it. They're very strong, the genuine ones. Stick with the genuine ones. There's nothing holding it other than keeping it within its parameters of the right angle versus how much pressure you're going to have on it. Okay, so the solution is shorter suspension travel, which works perfectly fine. if you haven't selected a spring that's giving you a 2.5 inch or a 2 inch or a 3 inch, you know what I mean? So it all comes down to when you do your spring selection, you need to keep your spring selection reasonable. Then you can use the shorter option struts. That's what we'll be looking into and discussing, and this video will go into our suspension playlist, okay? Because we're going to recommend a different part number. It's a Prado part number. I haven't done it yet, and put that in the front of some of the Hiluxes and have a look at the angles, because we'd rather you didn't have to do a diff drop, because once you do a diff drop, then you've got to do a bash plate drop. We've been through all this before, and then you've just lost all that clearance from your tyres. So then you do actually need bigger tyres, because you put too much travel on your struts. Then you've got to put a diff drop, and then you've got to have a bash plate that gives you less clearance, right? So I hope you're with me with this. Having longer drive shafts might solve the problem when the wheels are fully extended, but if they were long enough to truly do that, when the wheel is at static height, that's the tyre, the wheel bearing next to the diff and the drive shaft sitting level, it would be too long. It would be pushing inward outward because it's too long. Do you get what I mean? So you can't truly have a longer drive shaft that solves the problem, and if you did, it would be aftermarket, and we know heaps of people that have had heaps of problems with all the aftermarket crap, okay? A lot of people go, oh, I've been using these for years. Well, we don't deal with, you know, luck. On the luck side, well, you can get lucky, but we don't deal with getting lucky. We want reliable, and that's why I'm bothering to speak to you now. So I hope this video has been a help to help you understand, and this information goes the same. I don't care if it's a Navara or a Triton or whatever the case may be. We've done lifts on all these vehicles. We don't do them anymore. That's what we used to do. Yep, we used to do lifts on dual cab Navara, you know, D40s, D22s, you know, with the torsion bars, you know, the Tritons and all that. We've done 200 series, we've done 80 series, we've done all this stuff, right? But we can't do everything, so we don't do it. We just do. I don't even do personally suspension installs anymore. It's done at our #1 workshop partner in Sunshine. 4x4 diesel workshop partner #1. Well, we're like one workshop in two places. That's how close we are. So you can book in with myself or the manager there. Just text me for the number. All this sort of suspension install work gets done there, and things may change in the future. Different things change. So stay tuned, subscribe, turn the bell on. Okay? You don't want to be too high, because once you're too high, then you've created your reason for wanting more down travel. Then you want that longer strut. Then you've put your CVs at risk. It's as simple as that. Now, as far as the factory diff goes, some people will say, oh, there's nothing wrong with it as long as you don't modify it. That's kind of right and wrong, you know. I'll agree to an extent, because just because something doesn't cause problems in its stock form doesn't mean it's okay or ideal. So if you were to modify it slowly and give it a little bit more travel and it causes problems, that means it was on the edge in the first place because of the substandard angles of the original mounting system. I'll sort of say this is maybe where Toyota or any manufacturer may be kind of stuffed up if they didn't get that diff spot on level. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. You can leave your stock standard and happy days then, or you go get your longer shafts if that's what you believe. But I've just done my best to explain to you, and I think it's ticked the boxes for most people, why the angle has got to do with the down travel, and changing the length of the shaft does not change the angle. It can't do it. But if you truly got a shaft that was, say, 30-40 millimeters longer to cope with that down travel, you better hope it stays there, because when it compresses and comes back up, it's going to be too long. It's going to cause problems. Hope you understand that. All right. This is the same for every IFS vehicle. Is going to vary a little bit, but you've got a similar principle. You're limited on how much articulation the wheel can go up and down at the front. That's why minimal modifications, raising the IFS part of things 30 to 40 mils good, and then you only need a little bit extra travel, because you can do with a little bit less down travel, and you know, a little bit less compared to what it had from factory by putting a higher spring. So you just increase the length a little bit and you keep your reliability. It works beautiful. That's what we do in the Prados. Bada bing, there's been some shortages of components. This is the problem as well. So there's 3 part numbers that can go on the front of the Prados and Hiluxes from Dobinson's, and sometimes we've got to use a different one and do some bush swaps, and depending how desperate everyone is. So there's a few variations out there, but the listing for the Hilux is the 220. That's the long one. There should be a 221, but some warehouses don't have available. It's a bit of a weird one. It's the shorter, like the 700 is the one for the 150 Prado. I like the 700 for the 120 Prado. The 221, I believe, is the 700 with the 220 bush in it, because the 120 Prado has got the same size thickness bush as the Hilux. So there's your bonus info. And what we're going to be trying to do is use the shorter one. Like I said, in this Hilux, what I'm going to do, I'm putting a K on diff drop in to see what it comes up like with that bash plate, so we can provide that feedback. If we like it, we'll keep it. If we don't like it, we'll return it to how it was before, and we'll put in some 700s or 221 front struts to shorten up that extension. We still believe that that front diff mounting from factory isn't really good enough, but it's good enough if you leave it stock standard. It's certainly high on the driver's side. I believe that's what's causing the problems. Bada bing, there's another video. Bada boom, I talk too much. Bada boom, subscribe, turn the bell on. We've got more important info coming your way. Check out our other videos in the suspension playlist. We're going to be adding to them. It's all there. There's the encyclopedia. This is just one piece of that million-piece jigsaw puzzle. Keep watching and listening if you want the right info. Thanks, guys. See ya.